Well, hi there. Warm welcome. You're watching Blueprint Explosive Exclusive, and I'm Meghna Dekha. Well, viewers, do you know that Mark Zuckerberg's Meta donated $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund? Well, after all, it was all about optics, isn't it? It's a different issue, of course, that from the inauguration ceremony, the video of Zuckerberg's alleged creepy stare at Jeff Bezos. There you have it, the creepy stare, as many people trolled him for, at Jeff Bezos' fiancée had made the headlines. But let's keep that controversy aside and tell you how of late there have been several efforts which seems to be made by the Meta boss to try and mend his and his firm's relationship with the Donald Trump Sarkar. But the question is, how much of these efforts can really help Zuckerberg? Well, the reason we ask you today this is because the US Federal Trade Commission has launched a high-stakes antitrust case against Meta, which is, of course, the parent company of Facebook, Instagram, as well as WhatsApp. The idea is to dismantle what it calls an illegal monopoly by Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, which has led to essentially a big blockbuster suit in United States courts. Well, the allegation against Meta is that it acquired Instagram in 2012 and WhatsApp in 2014 with an aim of crushing its competition. In fact, the US FTC has claimed that Meta's action deprived the consumers of alternate social networking platforms which had limited the scope of innovation. Well, the charge is that it was an attempt to kill all competition. As you can see, these are the charges which Meta faces today in the court, that it has tried to kill all competition. And also the Federal Trade Commission's argument is that Meta's $1 billion purchase of Instagram and in 2012 and then later on a $19 billion acquisition of WhatsApp in 2014 were essentially strategic moves to try and suppress the competition. As you can see, these are the whopping amounts that Mark Zuckerberg had given to buy WhatsApp, which was $19 billion. He bought Instagram at $1 billion. The FTC has said that this was way more than the market value of the two when it was acquired, which led to several suits in the United States in many of the regions as well. But this is what really raised the red flag. The internal emails, that was another problem. The internal emails of Zuckerberg have now been presented as evidence in the courts as well. In fact, you can see those internal evidences. Well, the lawsuit seeks to force Meta to divest Instagram and WhatsApp. And this could possibly change a lot for the company itself. Imagine Meta being broken up. You have, on one hand, you have Meta, which is going to then lose both WhatsApp as well as Instagram. Will it be on sale? Hence, the stakes are very, very high for Meta's $1.4 trillion advertising empire that they have. In fact, look at the dominance of Meta. That's going to give you a sense of why this case is so very important. Many of you would be on WhatsApp and Instagram as well. For example, look at this. WhatsApp has about 2.78 billion users. Facebook users are about 3.07 billion. Instagram, which is very popular with the general younger generation now, that has about 2.4 billion users. Gives you a sense of the magnitude of the spread of these three together as a company. The acquisitions, they are saying now that they were driven by innovation with an aim to improve the user experience. So what is it that Mark Zuckerberg had said? Remember, it's very significant for us to point out that he was the witness number one. He himself deposed before the courts, and this is what he had to say in his defense. He said that the priority was to allow people to connect. That was the priority, which is why they had acquired. They had bought Instagram, he said, for camera technology. That these are the reasons and the rationales as to why such a huge amount of money was dished out to buy Instagram, to acquire Instagram. He also has said that it is a service that lets people discover. This is what Mark Zuckerberg has said in the courtrooms. Now, interesting, remember, 7 years ago, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, had testified for the first time in the Congress. At that time, he had clearly says he knows how to handle such situations. But this fight around illegal monopoly is not new. in fact, sample this. Let's tell you how it's not just Meta in the past. You've had several other big tech giants, 3 of them noticeably, which we are going to tell you about, with similar charges of monopoly that they have been facing. For example, Google, the charge was that it was illegally monopolizing online search, and the outcome was that it was found guilty. Well, that's right. Let's also tell you about the other big tech giant, Amazon. The charge that it had faced, that it was anti-competitive and it has been following unfair practices as per court ruling. Now, this is still sub judice, something that Amazon may have to face in courts and continues to face in courts. Of course, then you have Apple as well, and this is something that they have faced cases in India as well when it comes to Google, for example. Apple has been also accused of monopolizing smartphone market. And of course, this case is also sub judice. We'll have to wait and see what really comes out of the courtrooms out of that. Let me go across to our panelists. Today, joining us on the floor, we have Vibhuti Jha, a former Republican candidate for New York Assembly. We also have Lloyd Matthias, who is an executive, a business executive and an independent director. I'm going to come to you first, Vibhuti Jha, so that you can explain to us. It seems to be a blockbuster lawsuit against Mark Zuckerberg. Is he a friend of the Trump Sarkar? Does it even matter? The FTC, as we all know, in the past is known to be pretty independent, and they are kind of insulated from any kind of political pressures. But then it's interesting how off late we have seen Mark Zuckerberg definitely reaching out to Trump.
Thank you very much for having me here. Good morning from New York. The point is here is a very simple play. You know, in democracy, in free enterprise, in America particularly, mergers and acquisitions are the primary tools for businesses to grow or offer people what they call it, the customers and clients, what is best for them. And as a result of which, what you are witnessing now is a classic clash between dictatorship and monopoly. We all know that dictatorship is not good as a political system. Likewise, monopoly is not good for the customers in any which way. So you are looking at a scenario in which the political combine of business and law, how it plays out. And that's what is playing out here. Nothing more, nothing less. You alluded to the fact that Zuckerberg is now pro-Trump. Don't forget, in 2016, his first term, Zuckerberg was the guy who was playing truant with Trump campaign. Let's not forget that. And now here you witness a very classic scene in which people begin to see what's good for them and the changing political and changing environment that is happening. So this is a classic test. It is a tribute to democracy and free enterprise that things then become, they do get adjudicated in the court of law. But who makes the laws? Politicians make the laws and lawyers write the
Congress.
Laws. Yes. So I'm talking about in the democracy as a general rule. It is always the politicians who end up making the laws and lawyers write the laws. So this is a very interesting nexus that exists. If all of you remember, during Hillary and Trump debate, when Hillary accused him of not paying taxes, what was Trump's response to that? You made the laws. Why don't you cancel the laws? Why don't you eliminate the laws? Why do you make the laws and then you blame me for doing because I followed the law? That's exactly what is going on here. But this is entirely political. All these arguments that we are offering this to client for, better experience and everything else, at the deep end of it, it is all about control, influence, people like you and I, because we rely upon those sources for our information base. We all know how our accounts get shadowed, how our accounts get truncated, and how our subscriptions suffer. So this is a very interesting trial. Thanks to democracy, thanks to the rule of law, nobody is above the law, and Meta will also have to subjugate himself.
Well, that's very interesting. You are saying that this is the win for democracy, that today Zuckerberg has to face this trial. However, that hasn't stopped him. As you pointed out, 2017, he may have played truant with Trump, but today things seem to be changing. In fact, let's tell our viewers about the evolving relationship between Zuckerberg and Trump and how he's been sending out feelers. Well, remember, Meta's fact-checking program was scrapped right after Trump Sarkar was sworn in, something that Trump had a problem with. following which a Republican was made Meta's global affairs head right after Trump was sworn in. Following which, another overture, as it was seen, a close aide of President Trump was elected to Meta's board. And of course, we've already told you about the $1 million donation which was given to Trump's fund by Meta. Are these not overtures? But the big question is, will it really help? And of course, in addition to that, Mark Zuckerberg has made multiple visits to the White House in the last few months itself. So does this mean that this bonhomie may just help? But let me go across to Lloyd Matthias. The reason why all of this is so very significant, Lloyd Matthias, because we've seen similar cases that Google has faced in India as well. That political bromance, as it is being called, between Mark Zuckerberg and President Trump should not overshadow business interests, should not overshadow free trade. And that is something which must be advocated across the world.
Hey, thanks, Megha. I have a slightly different take. I think before getting into the politics of the issue, I think one would look at it purely in the context of business, right? Both Mark Zuckerberg and, in a sense, Google are smart business folks.
Right.
What Mark Zuckerberg really did was soon after Facebook became, let's say, one of the world's largest social media networks, he looked around to see were there any potential competitors or people who are playing in the social media space that were relevant, right? In 2012, he saw Insta and, photography as a tool for sharing becoming big.
Right.
That's when they snapped up Instagram for $1 billion. And a couple of years later, they suddenly realized that chat was getting huge, right? And therefore, WhatsApp was making huge waves in the market. And I think Facebook then purchased WhatsApp for $16 billion just 2 years later. So
19,
what in
I
effect...
believe, but okay.
Yeah, 19 maybe. What in effect it did was Meta, and Facebook got christened, really then had three large behemoths. It had the world's largest social networking site in Facebook. It had the world's largest, shall we say, Instagram, picture kind of sharing site on Instagram. And by far, it has the world's largest chat network in terms of WhatsApp. What it enables Meta to do, therefore, is easily move consumers from one to the other. All of us who use Facebook or Insta realize how seamless it is to kind of switch between one network and the other. So they have a treasure trove of data. And not to be silent, I would say parallelly, Google did something very similar. Back in the 2015 or so, it acquired YouTube. Today, YouTube, in a sense, is the world's largest single media network, right? The number of people that watch. So I think businessmen will look to mergers and acquisitions to grow organically or otherwise, so that they get the larger share of the consumer eyeball. And the more the share of consumer eyeball, the more the profits, right? So that's the normal way of business growth, aside from the politics. I think what one is rightly seeing, and Mr. Jha seems to be alluding to that, is right now there seems to be a bit of a political, interference or issue in the whole matter. But having said which, I think the bigger concern, if you look at the two largest networks in the world, namely Alphabet, which is Google, and Meta, I think Google search, which has a more than 90% share of the world's search market, I think that, in a sense, is relatively far more monopolistic, right? Consumers still have a choice, right? You don't like Facebook, you possibly use your own. In China, They use a different network. A lot of us use X. You can use various other things. But yes, it is too large. And I think sooner than later, antitrust is going to come after these big digital behemoths and possibly split them. A couple of decades ago, we saw it in telecom, the creation of the baby bells. So I think what's happening is an eventual play. Sooner than later, these big corporations, just because of their sheer scale and the ability to, in a sense, control global opinion, will eventually have to split into smaller corporations.
So essentially, free trade will eventually rule. And especially when it comes to these behemoths, the monopoly is likely to end. But let's also, since we are talking about what the defense was of Mark Zuckerberg, let's tell you, does his defense that it was only about acquiring the camera technology, it was only about giving a better experience to our users, does that really hold? Well, this is what has been cited by the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. It has cited a 2012 email where you can see a proposed acquiring of Insta and halting updates is being proposed by Mark Zuckerberg. He's also been asked about this 2011 email where he was informed that Insta can copy what FB already offers. Now, these are apparently emails which were exchanged between the top executive. Also, Zuckerberg in 2008 had allegedly written that it is better to buy than to compete. So essentially, if you can't compete with them, then just buy them. That seems to be the FTC's understanding of this entire case, and the charges are. Vibhuti Jha, it's also very interesting. Since we are talking about your legal justice system, there is no jury in this case. And interestingly, you have Judge Boasberg, if I'm pronouncing his name right, Judge Boasberg, who's going to be presiding over it. He is the same person who had ruled against Trump's deportation of the alleged Venezuelan gang members. Is that going to be adding another level of interest in the case?
Of course it will. I mean, we all know Judge Boasberg, how he ruled, and what we are looking at. And I think both with reference to India and the United States, who I call are the world's two most prominent democracies, not large, small, old or young, but two most prominent democracies are right now going through a judicial, judicial activism of its own kind. So this is where a tussle will happen, no doubt about that. The question is who will thrive, who will survive? Because these are very essential elements that we are going through. Technology has brought a tectonic shift in the way we conduct our life, the way we communicate. Look at it, New York and Bombay or Delhi, wherever you are, Meghna, we are communicating live digital for free. Think about it from that perspective. So it is all about control and influence on various elements of life, social, economics, business, and every sense, because everybody wants to capture the famous consumer. And I always say, why is consumer considered the king? Because consumer is a damn guy who pays for all of it. So eventually, we are the ones we have to make a determination whether when my views are being curtailed because somebody's monopoly. And Lloyd pointed out very correctly that Google, 90% search engines. So the bigger guy crushes the competition in the name of competition, in the name of growth, in the name of acquiring higher technology or superior offerings. So my thinking is one
of the very interesting things that Vibhuti Jha has said, and I think is the perfect way to round it up, where now the war is not so much about territory, about the mines, which perhaps it was at one time. It is about influence. It's about the reach. That is the latest capital in the world. About information, about data. That is the biggest capital in the world, which is why you have these wars over monopoly, who can monopolize these latest assets across the world. And it'll be interesting to see whether the court rules that it was indeed crushing of competition, or will Zuckerberg get some kind of a relief saying that no, it was just to ensure that there is better engagement with the UAE as well. We'll wait for that one to come out. Thank you so much, Vibhuti Jha, for joining us here on Times Now. Also, Lloyd Matthias with your views on this. Without a short break, don't go anywhere.